Live Curious, 내셔널지오그래픽 채널.
This isn't your average job.
Holy cow!
Being a National Geographic photographer isn't easy.
Boom.
If you're under pressure of time, you have to take any option.
They defy danger.
You can surface from a dive and get swept out to sea in no time at all.
And sometimes prepare for the worst. Always on a quest for that perfect shot. And now, we're counting down Nat Geo's top 10 photos of 2010. In the field, what a photographer experiences is immediate. Oh, man. They travel to the ends of the earth.
Seems like the first step in a 1,000-mile journey.
To get the most striking, memorable photos to tell a story.
Every year, we make about 1.5 million photographs, and roughly 1,000 appear on the pages of our magazine. What we would like to have happen with these top 10 photographs is for all of us to look at the photographs and understand this complex, fascinating world we live in and inspire people to take action and to make the world a better place for us all. Wes Skiles came to us and told us about a magic place in the Bahamas. These blue holes where fresh water, seawater mix, one of the most dangerous places to dive in the world.
There's this incredible dynamic flow that surges through these caves. If you get caught in one of those things when it's sucking, you die. This is a hydrogen sulfide environment. It's poisonous and toxic. We feel the effects when we're down in it. We have to limit our exposure. The Blue Holes of the Bahamas is one of those stories that I've wanted to do for 20 years. The project took almost a year to photograph.
Wes chooses for his photo a place 24 meters underwater called the Cascade Room.
When you get into the Cascade Room, all of a sudden, boom, you're in it. You're in one of the most beautiful places on Earth. The Cascade Room photograph was a real endeavor. And my goal was to capture an image that translated to the audience of what it feels like to be down inside the earth. All underwater cave photography is hard. We have no real communication to talk to people. We are 100% dependent on a very, very talented team to operate lights and strobes and perform complex and difficult diving maneuvers. This is a complex picture. I had to figure out a way to do a transect line that will allow me to keep the camera at the same depth and keep it at the same angle in a cave. I had to find this spot that I could do this. I took it as a series of photographs. Only the central corridor would be lit, and that above it would be black, and below it would be black.
Wes took great risk in these photographs. The long, narrow composition as he stitched picture after picture together so thoughtfully to make this compelling image that captures the mystery
an assignment like this, my photo count was 34,000 photographs. A great photograph is pure magic, and it's amazing how seldom it actually occurs.
I chose Wes Skiles' picture because he takes us to a place we've never seen before. It's a celebration of the diversity of the world, and it's a celebration of exploration.
This isn't your average martial arts academy. Here, 20,000 students practice kung fu forms inspired by the legendary martial arts of the Shaolin Temple.
The image that was selected for this year was taken at the Shaolin Tago Martial Arts School in Dongfeng, Henan, China. What we wanted to do was try to show what is Shaolin Kung Fu today. It's a sports store, there's a lot of peak action, and yet you can't have every picture be of somebody throwing a kung fu kick, and you've got to really kind of look beyond that and take it back to the essence of the narrative approach.
Fritz Hoffman didn't just happen to get an assignment in China. He's lived here and speaks fluent Mandarin.
When I was photographing in the schools, I tried not to talk too much to the kids because then it takes their attention away from what they're doing, which is what I want to photograph. But at some breaks, I would loosen them up a little bit and get some of their information, where they're from, how did they get to the school, which was always a blast because they're just so eager to be able to talk to a foreigner. Somebody who can speak with them in their own, language.
Fritz Hoffman is a great photographer because he has the ability to blend in, especially in China. He's lived there for years. He understands the culture, he understands the people, and they immediately respect him because of his grasp of the culture and the language.
It's always such an advantage to be able to communicate with the people that I'm photographing in China, and oftentimes I'll just kind of keep quiet and listen to the discussion.
In the blink of an eye, Fritz finds a moment.
Even though it was the dead of winter and below freezing, the kids were so focused and disciplined. The biggest challenge for this photo was just seeing it first and then being quick about getting it because it didn't last very long. What we're seeing in this image is the start of the class, start of the day for these students who are training. They have these staffs that they use for sparring with each other. But what they're doing here is they've warmed up, been through the warm-up exercises, and they're crouched there listening to their coach who's disciplining them for the previous day and just reminding them, what they need to work on to be a better student. It's a nice little moment, it reminds me of a child's excitement about the life ahead. Because you see that in their eyes, that this is my commitment to my life. I got about 2 frames on this and then just moved on to the next. But really, in the end, it's not until you get back into the office and you're editing through and trying to create sequences for the narrative where you actually start to really kind of cut down and make pairings of images.
This photo transcends the article because of the honest, open expressions on the young men's faces, with their staffs, the eagerness in their eyes, their anticipation of what they can learn. That becomes universal. That touches us all. we as human beings have to do better than this. I looked at Mark Leone's photograph of an Asian black bear having bow removed, the bear's tranquilized, and I was shocked and saddened. That became the lead picture to a powerful story on the Asian wildlife trade. This is an illegal practice in Vietnam, and Mark had to go to great lengths to make this picture.
The assignment was to cover the Asian wildlife trade, not just the commerce aspects, or the legal enforcement against it, but also the cultural background, the conservation, and as well as the consumerism.
This was shot over 3 years. I thought when I was going in that this might be risky because a lot of this stuff is illegal activity, and you don't know who is behind the legal activity. There's deals going on where the officials are also controlling the trade. I didn't know who to trust when I was working. I just would be very low key. I could just, go into a place and be very friendly, very curious, and do some shooting. For this bear picture, I was shooting in Hanoi, and if you go out an hour out of town, there's these highway areas where you'll just find all these bear bile farms, just one after another. And so we just drove out there. Finding them wasn't that hard. The hard part is getting to take pictures. I was about an hour outside of Hanoi, and it was around 10 in the morning. When you go into these bear farms, the reason the bears are there is to be extracted for bile. They'd stick a tube in the gallbladder, and they just pump out the bile. This bile is supposedly good for male impotence, for hangover cures, for liver disease. So the bear's in the cage, like it's 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters. They drag the bear towards the edge of the cage. And the bear, it's frightened, and so they stick a needle in its paw, and then 10 minutes later, the bear's out cold, and then they can drag it outside the cage. And they've had a small portable ultrasound machine. They put the jelly on to try to locate the gallbladder with the ultrasound. So once they find the gallbladder, then they can stick the tube in, and then they pump it out for like 10 minutes, and all this yellow-green liquid comes out of the gallbladder and comes in a little bottle. After a certain point, the bear won't be doing this anymore, and then they kill them, and because also the bear body parts are also worth something on the market.
If Mark went in as a National Geographic magazine photographer, he would under no circumstances get the picture of this black bear in this dire situation. Mark was at risk continually. You're dealing with organized crime, and to be discovered could make a situation that could be extraordinarily dangerous. This story helped clean up some corruption in Asia in the wildlife trade. It changed some legislation in some nations in Asia and made people really think about what kind of a relationship we want to have throughout the world with wild animals. When David Lichfarger came to us and said he wanted to do a series of stories on life in 1 cubic foot, I thought he must be mad.
This isn't your average school of fish.
He's got this green box, 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot. And he's going to take that into a coral reef, plunk it down underwater, obviously, and then he's going to see what passes through that box. And if it doesn't pass through the box, he doesn't photograph it.
The idea of looking at a small place very closely and carefully comes from an Edward O. Wilson quote about it is possible to spend a lifetime on a Magellanic voyage around the base of a single tree. The idea is how much life can fit in your lap. The sort of predetermined size is 1 cubic foot.
David photographs 1 cubic foot in 5 different places around the world. It's part of an unusual assignment for National Geographic magazine.
It is a stainless steel 1/4-inch rod, welded, and it can be taken apart. So you can carry it up a tree or take it out on a coral reef.
David sets up his cubic foot everywhere.
We made a list of predetermined habitat types: a coral reef, a cloud forest canopy, a shrubland, some leaf litter, which we did in New York City in Central Park. You want to choose the best spot. And once I chose a spot, I'm sort of committed. Okay, so it's going to be something like this, except we're going to take off the bottom and sink it. It's intended to be kind of a representation of that cubic foot over the course of a normal day. To find the creatures in the soil, we took the soil sample and the leaf litter sample to the American Museum of Natural History, to the entomology department, and they helped us sort it out. Central Park, the most heavily visited urban park in the world. These are not remote, pristine places, but they still have tremendous abundance of life that we should take care of because it can feed the wonder of the world.
No matter where he is, the whole cubic foot mess has to be bagged and taken to a lab for further study and photography. It's in Moorea, French Polynesia, that David's choice photo is born.
The hundreds of different shapes and forms that live on the coral reef crest in this small area. I mean, it's like a miniature version of a skyscraper. Everything is in layers. Everybody is on top of each other. But the thing that makes it work is this huge flow of water. In Moorea, in this particular spot, it's so well studied and documented that we actually were able to accomplish the identification of each creature. And we calculated it was more than 40,000 creatures per hour were in the water column that are feeding and supporting that stationary spot.
That's a nice crab.
Good smell.
David takes his favorite sea critters and photographs them one by one. He then takes them to his photo editor, Todd James.
David came back from the field and dumped 44,260 pictures and then smiled and walked away. I cried. So we knew we wanted to do collages, but it wasn't until we got to the page that we started to figure out, you know, at what size can they work? You can see each individual. Others, they run smaller, and you can kind of just get a sense of the diversity of life in that area.
I chose this photograph because every time I see it, I see something different. It is so complex, so interesting. It's a photograph I want to sit down and spend time with.
I think that that spotted boxfish she's very fetching. And, you know, I like the way she's looking out of her eye. I mean, honestly, if I'm reincarnated, I'm going to come back as a boxfish and look her up.
There's a tremendous amount of life, you know, in a small area. It's a magnificent opportunity to just sit and really closely observe how a little piece of an ecosystem functions.
Imagine you're a woman or a child in northern Kenya. Every day of your life, you spend 8 to 12 hours a day just gathering water. That's all you do. And if you don't gather the water, your family goes thirsty.
This particular story had to fit in a mix because of the water issue. You know, it's playing a role within the mix of stories. So as a photographer, I needed to understand what that role was. Well, I think the message about water is we don't have enough. And and when you don't have enough, the burden of gathering water is extreme. And the purpose of the story was to show the impact of women's search for water and their gathering of water. What is the impact of that on their lives? I think we forget in our comfortable lives that most people live on a margin that is something that we might not even be able to survive. I think the women in their just everyday physical lives showed us all that it was an incredible burden on their lives. They are perceived as beasts of burden by the family, but they know this is how they'll live. They're gathering water from the age of 3, 4, as soon as they can walk. Well, this was in the middle of the day. We had been traveling through the desert and saw a few women kind of by the roadside. Soon, another woman joined them, and then another woman and a child, and this group started to grow. I just hang out with them and photograph. And by the way, they're carrying like 100 pounds of water. I only have 2 little cameras on me, and I'm like, to keep up with these. They are hardcore and very powerful human beings. The women started to spread out to go to their individual villages. I thought, oh my God, this is the moment. You couldn't appreciate their burden and the kind of landscape that they have to trudge across every day. So by being higher, we could actually see what they're faced with. So I got on the roof of the car, and we very, very, very slowly and very quietly followed the ladies. So I was actually shooting from the roof of the car.
Lynn can see a photo developing.
When I first saw Lynn's photograph, I immediately knew that that picture was the way to set up this incredible saga they go through in their lives every day to gather water. If she would have taken this in low, early morning, late evening, dramatic light, you wouldn't get that sense of harshness. The contrast between the desert floor, this arid area, and the blue sky, and this endless journey. There's a feeling of endlessness of this picture, of a trek that just continues on and on and on, day after day after day, a trek of survival for the women and for their families. After a photographer returns from an assignment, he or she, in this electronic age with digital photography, generally has a pretty good idea of what their best 100, 200, 300 best pictures are. Everybody fine with the lead picture? They've been talking with a picture editor. They'll sit down with that picture editor to develop a selection of photographs.
Every photographer is assigned to a photo editor who guides the photographer on assignment.
My name is Gail Fisher, and I'm a senior photo editor at National Geographic magazine. I edit lots of film, but there's also lots of logistics to deal with. We're working with photographers on proposals. There's a lot of research involved. And then you're working on several stories, and they're all in various stages of the game. So you might be in layout on one story, and maybe you're at an interim on another, and you have several photographers out in the field. A lot of times photographers will shoot anywhere from 13,000 to 15,000 images, and if it's natural history, the numbers are even a lot higher than that. As I'm editing, it's a very intuitive process. You're looking at these thousands of images as you're scanning through it, There are just images that literally jump off the computer screen. It's like the stars are aligned. Everything comes together. The light's right, the moment is right, it's layered. You look at it and it's a very complex image maybe. And the editing process, I move several hundred forward, and then from there I'll do a second edit, and maybe I'll do a third edit before I finally come up with 40 or 50 or 60 images I want to move forward. And within that process, you're looking for new information. You're looking to cut out the redundant images. It has to tell a narrative.
National Geographic has a long-standing commitment to photograph indigenous cultures, especially indigenous cultures that are changing at a rapid pace. This photograph tends to get at the chaos, the incredible change that the Surrey people in this case are going through, but people all up and down the Omo River.
And it's photographer Randy Olson's mission to capture it.
The Omo River Valley is in southern Ethiopia. They're building a dam at the top of this valley that is going to take away their form of agriculture in 3 years. There are 20 million people north of this dam that are going to benefit, and there are 200,000 in this valley that are going to have their lives destroyed. The east-west component of the story is that there's an arms trade. There's arms coming out of the former civil war in Sudan, there's arms coming from Somalia, and this area in Ethiopia is right in the middle. This group of culturally distinct individuals will be starving and heavily armed in about 3 years. I feel when I walk into this village that I have American tattooed across my forehead, or I'm from Mars. When you're trying to work, when you're trying to explain to people why you're in their lives, you really need someone who they relate to, who can make them understand what it is that you're doing. Because of my fixer, my helper, I could be there for a couple of days and people would get comfortable and they'd go back about their business. Alcohol is a huge problem in this area. One of the things that happens when you start adding food aid into this picture, then every time they get a sack of sorghum, they have an opportunity to ferment it and they can literally be drunk year-round. All of these things add up to be a very volatile situation. This photograph is a woman with a large clay lip plate who has come into a bar. It's at the end of the last road into the Omo Valley. After you are in this town, you're just walking. And this woman is drinking honey beer, and she is pouring the last bits onto her lip plate and licking them off. She's just finishing off a beer. And what the scene going on outside this bar is the policemen with megaphones are going up and down the main street saying, please check your AK-47s at the police station.
Randy Olson has become the kind of photographer who can endure great hardship. And great hardship is going to be experienced when you are in an area as hot, as desolate, as dusty, with virtually no infrastructure. When you look at Randy's pictures, especially this one, it illustrates the fact that her culture is undergoing dramatic changes that are probably more intense than anything her culture has gone through for hundreds of years.
The first thing the photographer has to be careful of course, is bias. And even more important possibly than bias would be judgment. I selected Stephanie Sinclair's photograph of women who are members of the Fundamentalist Church of Latter-day Saints. And she has this ability and this persistence to penetrate a culture honestly, openly, with this sense of curiosity that disarms people.
To get people to be open about their lives, you kind of have to be open about yours. There's actually about 38,000 polygamists that are kind of offshoots of the mainstream Mormon church.
You'll tell me when to drop, right?
It was very difficult to get them to trust me for either piece. And it really took a lot of listening. It took some time to get them to open up and talk to us without being defensive.
Do you want to dry your hands?
How come Mother Joanne gets crazy?
My personal interest in it, that it was, beyond just polygamy. These people definitely did this for their religious beliefs. And so how far does that go, and how do we deal with that as a country?
But today, everyone forgets the controversy and just has fun.
It was a beautiful day, and it was like a whole big family thing where, everyone had ATV kind of vehicles.
The destination, a zip line into the cold water of a stunning Arizona lake.
This is definitely, being at the right place at the right time and having worked on a story long enough to have all of the elements come together for you.
No.
When these girls started piling on top of each other and doing this pyramid, I definitely knew this was going to be some of the best pictures I had taken. And particularly when the one girl was reaching up. It just kind of had almost like a biblical reference. You don't really know what she's reaching for.
But what Stephanie has spent months reaching for, she has finally grabbed. When Chris Johns sees this photo, he knows Stephanie has captured something special.
The symbolism of that, of reaching towards heaven, here's this feeling of sisterhood and this feeling of absolute joy. That photograph could only be made by someone those women deeply, deeply trusted and had spent time with. And Stephanie is one of those people who will spend months gaining that trust to come into a culture and reveal it in ways that's never been revealed before. Every page of the April issue of National Geographic magazine is devoted to the world's fresh water supply. One place we had to go was the Middle East, where water is such an important part, not just of life, but of politics too. And the Jordan River, for thousands of years, has been the lifeblood for many in the Middle East. We sent Paulo Pellegrin there, and we knew he would make the honest photographs we needed in this very combustible part of the world.
This was actually my first assignment for the National Geographic. The Water Wars was a special issue that the Geographic did. I was asked to shoot on the Jordan River, which is sort of an important sort of source of fresh water. It's also a divided river, sort of 3 countries and 3 communities: the Israelis, the Palestinians, and the Jordanians. And so it has a number of social, territorial, sort of political sort of complexities to it. Dead Sea has a strange, sort of nearly sort of metallic sort of quality to it. It's a place which is so sort of charged sort of with history and symbolisms also. It really sort of contains so much of our religious sort of, Judeo-Christian culture. This summer was over a period of probably 4 or 5 months and 2 trips. It's a territory that I know well, so that facilitated things, because it can be a little bit tricky sort of to move and navigate sort of in the West Bank. I took that picture sort of at the end of the day. The light was fading, and I was actually about to leave when this Palestinian family arrived, and 2 girls started entering the water. One of the girls entered, and she played a while sort of in the water. I was just there sort of photographing them for a while. So at one point, it was just us. So it was quite beautiful sort of end of day, sort of with this magical sort of red light in this sort of very strange and beautiful sort of place.
Paulo's photograph has this beautiful universal appeal. Everyone, I believe, can relate to the lakeside. It has this beautiful, soft light, and all the politics and all the things that surround water in the Middle East, and it softens it. It softens that story so we can all relate to this wonderful moment with these 2 children at the Dead Sea.
I particularly like that picture. I think it represents sort of like a real moment, sort of which transcends the political sort of difficulties, and it speaks about the water, about the issues, but it also transcends them at the same time. So it's a moment of quiet, like a universal moment of a child sort of bathing in these sort of sacred waters.
This particular story was primarily done in Cairo and at the Valley of the Kings in Luxor. I'm a photographer with National Geographic magazine, and I do a lot of work on the origin of civilizations. The hardest part of this was the access. In that tomb, deep underground, it's hot and sweaty and humid, and there was a great deal of stress in the situation.
Kenneth's assignment is to photograph the mummies while scientists conduct DNA tests to identify the royal family. The bodies can only be exposed to open air for short periods of time, giving Kenneth just minutes to get each shot.
The total amount of time that we had with Queen T might have been 10 minutes. They would open the box, we'd get that mummy, we'd say done, and he'd be gone. We were finished, there's no backing up. We have to be really careful not to contaminate them or to reach into the box and touch them. So we'll prepare all of our lights ahead of time. It was in that side chamber, in the burial chamber, a little side room, where these 4 mummies were laying. When they took those mummies out, cleaned them up, and went to do the DNA test, they put them on the little wooden benches. And we came up with a lighting solution for that box. And then once we took that picture, we were stuck with that lighting scenario, regardless of what the other boxes looked like. We had to match that first picture. The workers brought out this particular mummy, which is our Queen T, and it was on a wooden bench, and it was covered with a sheet. And they laid it on the little table that we had set up with the lights. And when they pulled back the cloth, it was just astonishing. It was, to me, like the most beautiful mummy I'd ever seen. She had the red hair. Her skin was in perfect condition for someone that's 3,500 years old.
Ken said, she's just beautiful. And of course, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder.
I just wanted to stand there and stare at her and look at her, and then I thought, well, we better keep moving, we got work to do. One of the most rewarding things was to see the family come together photographically. Maybe that's the goal of all these pictures. When you open the magazine, you go, wow, what's that? And then the reader needs to know more about it, and then that's when they read the story.
Here's Queen T, magnificently lit, large format photography. Every detail so finely brought before us. Who would have known she was Tut's grandmother? And to meet her in this way and then to discover through DNA what her relationship is with this incredibly famous person, King Tut, made this a picture we simply had to pick for the top 10. My favorite picture for 2010 was made in the mountains of Afghanistan by Lindsay Addario.
My assignment in Afghanistan was to photograph women in Afghanistan. It was something that National Geographic really hasn't done before. Doing the story many, many times. I mean, I was reduced to tears.
With good reason. Women in Afghanistan are seemingly invisible in a land dominated by the Taliban and war.
You just repeatedly listen to women tell the story of how they've been beaten and how they set themselves on fire, and all I can do is tell their story.
Like many great pictures, this one unfolds by accident.
We were driving along the side of the road from 5 or 6 days covering maternal health. The number of women who die in childbirth is the second highest in the world. I saw 2 women on the side of the mountain that is quite unusual to see 2 women on the side of a mountain without a man. And so I told the driver to stop the car, and I got out and ran up to the 2 women, and it turned out that one was in labor and her water had just broken. So I sent my driver to go find the husband. They left me sitting with the 2 women, and of course I couldn't communicate at all, so I was just sort of sitting there and trying to photograph, but it's also very uncomfortable to photograph a woman when she's in labor and she's so uncomfortable being photographed, and so it was this very awkward sort of scene.
But Lindsay's years of experience in Afghanistan make this picture possible. In it, photographer and the moment come together. For all the sad scenes she has witnessed, this story, at least, ends happily.
I ended up taking both women and putting them in my car with the husband of the woman who was about to deliver, and we drove them to the hospital, and there she delivered safely.
Afghanistan is a country that is incredibly dangerous to photograph in, but it's also a place that I believe will experience more turmoil if women are not respected, if someone doesn't stop at the side of the road to give them a ride. And Lindsay Addario did that, and in the process made a magnificent picture that's worthy on hanging on a museum wall. What we want people to take away from the top 10 photos is an appreciation and an understanding of the world. And photography can do that as a universal language in a way that we really believe in. There's an old expression, tell me what you see, tell me what you feel. And that's what our photographers do superbly.